Hello, everybody. My name's Ebrich Cabral, and welcome to How to End Prejudice. This is our second episode. We appreciate you watching or listening. This is a dream of ours and something that obviously will never happen on our own. But we believe that there are plenty of people out there who are fighting prejudice head on. They're fighting against division. They're fighting for unity in so many different ways and in so many different contexts that we thought, let's bring in lots of voices to this conversation so that people can hear what are people doing practical ways out there and what are they learning? How are they fighting prejudice? How is this even a possibility? And today we're going to tackle something that is close to many of our hearts, whether you're listening or watching. I'm sure this is something you're hearing about and worried about, but we know at the same time that there's hope because there's so many communities rallying around this topic. And it's obviously related to our current situation, the COVID pandemic, and the huge spike in hate crimes against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. So today's topic is how to end prejudice against AAPI, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And we have an incredible group of people here that I think you will love to hear from and learn a lot from. And it's my pleasure and honor to introduce them to you. We have two incredible women here, local Metro Detroit area, who are doing the very important work of rallying around communities who are feeling and knowing that they are being targeted in many ways. So let me introduce them both to you. And I also have a dear friend as well, who I'm going to introduce just shortly. So let me introduce Ceena first. Ceena Vang is a first-generation Hmong American woman from Troy, Michigan, currently living in Detroit. And this year, she co-founded WWN, which stands for Wherever We're Needed, a community organization supporting Asian, Black, and marginalized communities through unity, solidarity, and action, wherever and whenever we're needed. Absolutely love that name. Thank you. She currently works as a nursing assistant in the medical marijuana and in the medical marijuana field, and in the talent agency. And I'm sure there's probably lots of other ands there at the end, doing lots of things. So thank you for being here, Ceena. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Also with us, part of WWN is Zora Bowens. She's a 23-year-old creative and activist from Detroit. She experienced life in many contexts and has always had a deep desire to make the world better. She recently spent 2 years in Hong Kong, participating even in the 2019 protests. Zora freelances in experimental marketing, design, and fashion photography. Love your work, by the way. And co-founded Wherever We're Needed with Ceena this year. So welcome, Zora.
Thank you for having me. Really great. Glad to be here.
No, thank you for being here for sure. And we also have Andrew Kim. He's originally from Vancouver, Canada, and currently serves as a teaching and discipleship pastor right here in Troy, Michigan, at Kensington Church. He's a second-generation Korean American who, outside of Michigan, has primarily lived on the East Coast and the Midwest. He's been married for 14 years and has 3 kids, 3 beautiful kids. Hi, Andrew. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, H. Appreciate it.
So this is obviously a group of voices that are going to be adding their input and their experience from very different perspectives, but at the same time, the heart is always the same, right? We are not going to stand by and just watch. We are going to do something, say something, and probably fail along the way, although I think all of you are doing incredible work. And we're going to put their social media tags and resources on the comments and everywhere we publish this so that you can access their work and follow it. But let me start with a very basic, maybe very big question for each of you. I'll start with you, Ceena, if that's okay. You're tackling this head on. And my first question is, can we end prejudice against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders?
I would say yes and no. I think ultimately, of course, the immediate answer would be yes. But I think that it will take a lot of time and reprogramming and reconditioning of a lot of people's minds. and the push for changing that. I don't think any of that can happen overnight. And I don't think that that's something that I will even see like in my lifetime or my generation. But I do think that in order to end the prejudice, or I guess lessen the prejudice, we all have to put in that work, like people of all colors, not just the Asian community putting in work for Asians. Um, but we also just have to educate ourselves and take full like accountability and responsibility and fault for, the things that we've been conditioned to learn that we also hold against other races as well.
Thank you. I appreciate the honesty and the hope right there from the beginning. Zora, where is your answer for this? Do you think we can actually end prejudice against AAPI?
Well, not to be negative, but I don't think, like, of course, in a perfect world, I think that it's possible to end prejudice, like maybe in 3020, like, I don't know. But right now, I just don't think it's possible in our lifetime to end prejudice against anyone, I know Black people in particular have been fighting this fight. It's been a long game, But I definitely think that like there are things that we can do to make people's lives easier during these times, and like stop the amount of prejudice that is happening. I feel like every year we get better and better in our progression of how we treat each other as humans, and like our level of empathy, especially with raising awareness. So I think it's definitely possible. Yeah.
Thank you. You're looking 1,000 years ahead. I mean, I think we got the right group of people here that talk about world change, like, mentality.
Yeah.
Andrew, do you believe we can end prejudice against AAPI?
Yeah, I would take the same idea or the same perspective as Zora. I think it's a very, very difficult thing to actually accomplish, especially in this type of lifetime. And Zora, you gave a great example of the Black community, and that is a struggle that has been going on for centuries. And yet, oftentimes, when we look back, there have been huge advancements, and there's been a lot of progression. But at the same time, also, it's discouraging when I read Martin Luther King Jr.'s his messages back like decades ago, and yet you could take his words and you could take so much of his sentiment and they apply exactly to today. Right. And we're talking like 50 years, 60 years later. And so in some ways there has been so much change, but in other ways we've actually moved backwards, or we've actually become static in that sense. And so do I think it could happen in our lifetime? Probably not. But at the same time, there is an optimism, because I feel like there just even in this past year, with everything that has happened with the AAPI community, there has been so much progress, and there's just so many great things that have happened in terms of various bills and different resolutions that have been introduced, whether it's on a city level or even a statewide level, to try to incorporate Asian American history into the curriculum, which I think is huge, because we're talking about awareness and education. Like even just recently, the anti-Asian hate crimes bill that was passed as well, and that was a huge bipartisan effort. And I feel like these laws are so incredibly important. But at the same time, I think when I look at it, is it actually possible? I feel like laws and resolutions and initiatives, these are really important. But at the same time, when I think about that, I'm also reminded of what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, and that like, I'll never forget this quote, and I love it. And he said that it may be true that the law cannot make a man love me, but it can keep him from lynching me. Right? And I think it speaks to the importance of laws. But at the same time, what really strikes me is that he refers to something so much deeper, right? Like a hatred and a desire to actually hurt someone who may not look like you, who is from a different place as you, has a different background than you. So he's talking about something that's deeper in the human heart, in the human spirit, that actually causes them to move in this direction. And like, at least coming from a faith perspective, what I believe is that I don't think any human being can change that about another person. And so like, from my perspective, it requires something even greater than just human beings or education or whatnot. It really does require the act of God. to actually do something that only he can do. And so that's sort of like my perspective on how I feel like this is, but it's such a complex, it's such a nuanced conversation.
Yeah, can I add on to that? Because you know, I think it's really interesting that you're talking about, you know, the like that it is something that's within people that we have to change. Like, and I full-heartedly agree with that. And so, like, you know, not to get off track or anything, but I think that a really good question that like we need to think about as well as like, how do we do that? Because like you can do it by talking to people, but also I feel like people act without empathy and with hate towards each other because it's taught to them because of the system that America was built on, you know, which is white supremacy and imperialism. But like we can talk about that later. But I definitely, you know, it's so embedded into like our education system, and like there's so many things that go unchecked that allow people to like think the way that they do. And I feel like while I think that it is important to have laws and reconstruct the system, so to be able to reconstruct people's minds about how they are thinking about each other. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this will take so many things and so many people, and that balance seems so important in anytime we talk about prejudice, and in this context for sure as well. You know, you have these big, probably immediate solutions, almost like urgent, like, hey, people are not safe.
Yeah.
Now, and at the same time, it's like, how do we reshape hearts for 1,000 years from now, or even for a generation from now?
Right.
So yeah, I think it's like,
appreciate that perspective.
Sorry, H. Yeah, I love what you like had to say, like Zora, because like when I think about that, like we as human beings, I feel like we have a propensity towards not necessarily towards like unity and coming together, but oftentimes I look at it as we have a propensity towards division. And like attracts like, and if something is different, we're afraid of it. And even like when I look at children, and having 3 kids of my own, even though like obviously like nature versus nurture, that's a completely different conversation, and that's a huge conversation. But sometimes even like when I look at my kids or other children, like even from the earliest of ages, rather than them saying, hey, you know what, I really want to share this with you, right? Rather than, sometimes they have their moments, but at the same time, it's often like, it's mine, right? It's mine. It's like, no, like stay away from me. And it's like this, like, where did you get this, right? Like maybe they got it from me, right? Absolutely, right? I'll definitely own that. But there have been so many studies with children, and I feel like it's just like this, it's like baked into us, right? Is that it's not like, hey, you know what, let me like share and let us come together. But oftentimes like what I see is like there's like this division that happens. And so on like whatever lines it is, and as we get older, it's definitely reinforced by the systems in our culture and in our world. And then we ultimately find ourselves like in these silos. And that basically is like the way that our world is oftentimes constructed. And so like I love what you had to say, Zora.
Thank you, for sure.
Well, I think this kind of frames our conversation really well. And I'm sure there are people listening who have faith backgrounds, some that maybe that was in their past or not currently. And I think the 2 topics so far have been, or the 2 ideas of how this even exists, you know, whether it's ingrained in us or whether it's taught. Both of those seem so difficult to erase or to undo. So maybe you can all tell me a little bit about, why are you bothering? Like, why is this? There's so many issues in the world. Why did you decide to get up and begin things and address this? It's not an easy thing to do. It's not. I'm sure it has cost you something or someone. So maybe you can share a little bit about that. Cena, we haven't heard from you in a minute here. Can you tell us a little bit about why this is so close to your heart and why you decided to start WWN and begin this conversation and dialogue?
Sure. So my whole life, like the 27 years that I've been alive, I feel like only within the last year or so is when I really began to basically identify with my Asianness and like fully embrace it. And once I like allowed myself to do that, I felt like I wanted to also embrace others, embrace their differences, embrace their cultural background, whether or not like they are Asian or not. Because I feel like, you know, when you're not white, you just have this idea where you just basically aren't good enough. And I really felt called to embrace that about myself and get other people to also like accept themselves for who they are. So because I struggled with that for so long, like I couldn't help but want to advocate for my people. I think that that's what is the most important, is like advocating for people who understand your struggles and like also resemble you, because you all kind of come from the same roots. And I think that Asians in general are so misstereotyped and misunderstood. And I think that is my main reasoning that I've been so fueled to continue to fight for the Asian community. But aside from that, I just think it's really important for like everyone to just be understood, because we all deserve that sense of acceptance.
I think it's fascinating that that journey began like inward, almost as like I need to embrace my true identity.
Yeah, for me it
Like that, almost like that overflows, because you think backwards sometimes, like, oh, if I'm just going to focus on myself, I'm going to become more and more selfish. But it's interesting that that overflows into I want others to experience the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an inward thing, like you said, and then with the attack of the Atlanta shooting, I think that was kind of like what just was the icing on the cake for everything. It hit home for me because my sister and my mom both work as like massage therapists and like is a nail technician, so they provide care and stuff. And even with business owners being attacked, like my entire family owns like Asian markets and Asian restaurants, so to know that these attacks are everywhere, like I feel very personally attacked by it, because my family, they're out here trying to make a means of a living wage, and it could have been any of them. So that is also the main reason like why I felt very called to start WWN with Zora.
Oh, thanks. That's very touching. And Andrew, do you want to tell a little bit about like how this journey began for you?
Yeah, it was not too long ago, but basically what happened was I was listening to a podcast, and it was out of it's a graduate school that's out in Southern California, and they have basically like an Asian American studies wing. And so the person who heads it up, he was on this podcast, and he was basically having this conversation and just telling the story of when students enter into one of his classes, which talk about history and Asian American identity. He said that a lot of them, they have this sort of epiphany that they're not white. And obviously, like, these are people like in their early to mid 20s. And I remember I was listening to this podcast, and I was getting ready for bed, and I was standing in my bathroom, and I looked at the mirror, and I thought to myself, wow, I'm not white. And I'm like, when I say that to people are like obviously, right? But it was basically like the idea of and obviously I've known that I'm not white, but basically for my whole life, that I've basically been chasing after whiteness, right? And trying to become and trying to assimilate. And there's a lot of different language for it. But I came to this realization, wow, like this is what I've been doing. And so it really started me on a journey of trying to understand, to really explore my identity, and also to better understand Asian American history, because that is an aspect that is not known. Forget like the larger population, even by Asian Americans, like they are largely ignorant, because, and like honestly, who can blame you? Because it's not taught anywhere. It's not taught really in our school systems, maybe like a tiny little sliver here and there. And so unless you actually have there's an intentionality, or somebody actually is intentional with you and says, hey, this is your story. Like, you grow up not knowing any of this, and you're basically ahistorical in your knowledge of like where your people, like where the Asian Americans have come from. And so I had this like huge, like this sort of like this epiphany, sort of like this light bulb moment. And then just not only delving into my story a little bit deeper, but also just having conversations with like friends, other Asian American friends. Like, one of the things that I came to realize in myself and in so many other Asian Americans is that our identity as Asian Americans, we view it as an obstacle, more as an obstacle to be overcome rather than a gift to be embraced.
Mhm.
And I was like, that is so incredibly sad. Like, and obviously coming from a faith perspective, like I view like we are like people who have been made by God. And when he made us, he wasn't like, oops, right? Like, made Andrew Korean. Oh, it's like too bad for him. His life is going to really stink, right? It wasn't like that, right? This is something that had intentionality. And like, it talks about it in the scriptures where like God made creation and he was like, this is good, right? And so like, when God made me this way, I don't believe in the way like you guys, exactly the way that you guys are. Like, it wasn't like, oops, right? And so, and that obviously has to do with my ethnicity as well. And so it really started me down this road. And as I've gone more and more and like met more and more people, it's been this extraordinary journey for me, and not only the quality of the people that I've met, but also just the epiphanies that I've had and how I've been able to learn.
Wow. Yeah, what a moment we're living in history, where we get to do this, because in many ways I'm a first generation immigrant, but come really young, years. For some of you, maybe second, third, and for many of our parents, grandparents, like they didn't even have the time to go through these like self-reflection journeys. And I don't like, we can't be too mad at them, right? Like surviving, starting businesses. Our moment is different. Like we don't want to just survive. Like, we get to do this. So we, in a way, I think it's beautiful, and we own it to ourselves and the next generation to do this well. So I appreciate that you're both stepping into that like vulnerable and really important aspect. Zora, could you share a little bit about how this became a passion for you as well? I'm guessing world travel has to do with it, and maybe friendships, but love to hear your heart on this.
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely like a few avenues that led me to this point, but I think that something that Andrew said that was really important is that made me even think more to like where my journey first started was I grew up in Detroit, but I also grew up in Grosse Pointe, and that's like very two different like Detroit is the most Black like populated city in America, next to like one of the most densely populated white areas in Michigan. And so the border is just very, like, living in those two communities that are right next to each other, it's very segregated. And I realized, I also grew up feeling like I compared myself to whiteness so much as well. When I was younger, trying to like fit into this white society, where I didn't get the opportunity to feel like I wanted to be like white adjacent. Like, I just wanted to be white, period.
Wow.
But so that's where my journey really, really began. Because there's just no reason that I should have felt that way as a child, but that's why I think it's so I'm dedicated to this specific type of prejudice against Asian people, is because we're both experiencing the same prejudice. Like, prejudice it's one thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it definitely changes how visible it is for different groups of people, but it's one thing and it operates in one way. So I can't end prejudice for myself if I don't fight for ending prejudice for all people. Mm-hmm. Because that's just how prejudice works. If any group is marginalized, everyone's gonna be marginalized.
Right. Yeah.
But I definitely, like, have been privileged to have Asian people in my life. Like I have Ceena in my life. I grew up with some Asian friends, and then I actually moved to Hong Kong for 2 years, which gave me a greater understanding of the world, in particular Asian culture, various Asian cultures, which is, you know, just, it gave me an understanding of Asian people where I feel like a lot of people don't have that understanding necessarily. And I feel like that's a little bit of an issue, is, you know, if you don't see something, or you don't interact with this group of people, then you have no idea what their issues are and no idea what they're going through. So it almost like you live in a bubble. You feel like it's not real, like it's not happening because it's not happening to you.
Right.
So that's pretty much why I'm dedicated to it, you know.
I love the word they use for privilege, you know, having a privilege of experiencing, having intimacy and closeness with others who are on the margins. And I think we need to own that word so much more. You know, I do consider it a privilege. You know, in Brazil, I never knew like what I really was. I don't think I was aware. I had great parents who always instructed me and reminded me, like, you're not just, you know, European Brazilian, you're not just Portuguese, you have African ancestors blood in you, you have native blood in you, and, you know, look out for those who are excluded. I really value that. But, you know, teenage years, kids years, you're kind of just going through it. Moving here and becoming like a 13-year-old immigrant, I consider that, I didn't know at the time, but like one of the best gifts I've ever received, because now I was able to experience life on the outside. Like, oh, I'm not in their circle, right? And I think that's a gift that I think we need to value so deeply, especially if we surrender it to the right things, which you guys are all doing. I think there's lots of more topics we want to get to. I just want to make sure we get to at least what you are doing today. What's working, what's not working, what is WWN doing, what is Andrew Kim and Kensington Church doing in this area? Because I think a lot of folks are probably listening going, okay, I'm part of the AAPI community, or I'm not, I'm white, I'm Black, like, what can I do? I want to hear what they're doing, and if it's working or not. So maybe I'll start with you, Andrew. You started this journey, discovering all the complexities of it, both internal and external. What are the things that you're doing that you're finding fruitful, and things maybe you've even stopped doing because you putting attention elsewhere?
Yeah, I think it's I think, like some of us mentioned it, like Zora, I think you mentioned this as well, but it's really like a pathway that I see in regards to awareness education as well as action. And I think a lot of it is like just simply awareness. And honestly, like awareness in regards to Asian Americans and the rest of the population as well, and the rest of our nation as well. I think like Asian Americans have to be aware as well. And it's really, really important. But in terms of like what I'm doing right now is that one of the things is that I meet with a group of about 20 or so church leaders and people who are just in the Metro Detroit area or really in the greater Michigan area. And we come together once a month to explore issues of identity and justice. And so that's like one of the big things. And that is like, it's not only an awareness and an education point of view, because we've had a lot of great conversations in terms of not only things that are relevant in regards to our faith, but also in terms of the larger conversation as well. Like one of the conversations that we just recently had was anti-Blackness in the Asian American community, the tensions, as well as the solidarity that has been present, not just right now, but historically as well, which is a really important conversation. And so these are conversations that we wrestle with, that we struggle with, but at the same time, this group, and like we represent communities, like thousands and thousands of people. And so these people who are part of this conversation and part of this group, like we lead, like collectively, we lead thousands of people. And so there's a lot of influence there. And so as our hearts and as our minds are changed, it obviously influences the way that we lead. And so I feel like this is like a very, very important group, at least from the way that I perceive it. And so those are the conversations that we have, but at the same time, there's been a lot of collaboration as well that has stemmed from this group. It's not just a group that meets over Zoom and then we have just great conversations, but we also had a gap, like when the Atlanta shootings happened. What happened? We gathered together, all of our faith communities. We gathered for a prayer gathering just over here at Kensington, and I feel like that was like a beautiful sort of act of solidarity, because it wasn't just the AAPI community who came out, but it was the Black people from our Black community showed up to like support from the white community. And so it was just this beautiful picture of solidarity and basically communicating, we stand together in this regard. And so that's just really one of it. And there's a couple other things, initiatives that I'm trying to work on. I feel like there is a couple of them are just basically around really focused on Asian American history, and trying to organize a tour out in California that just really goes to just major sites, whether it's Angel Island. Manzanar is a huge one, which I'm like really excited. I really want to go if unfortunately COVID has prevented that to a certain degree. There's a lot of history in Chinatown in San Francisco, which is an amazing place, like Little Tokyo in LA, all these like Koreatown. And there's just so much history that is there. But at the same time, even in Detroit, there's a lot of history here as well. In regards to the AAPI community, whether it's Chinatown and what has happened with Chinatown and being moved again, and just the history of the Chinese and Chinese American community here. Obviously, Vincent Chin, his murder back in 1982 was huge and is a big part of Asian American history. And there's so many other things as well. And so that really goes back to the awareness and the education piece. And really the last thing, sorry, because I don't want to take, because Zora and Cena, you guys are doing amazing stuff as well. But I think the last thing is I'm really looking at a partnership in creating material for Asian Americans and resources for Asian Americans, because I think one of the difficulties is that obviously there are books out there are college courses out there and all this kind of stuff, but at the same time, I don't know, like those things are really great. But in addition to that, like, is there anything else for people? Like, unless like people are willing to read like a 250-page book on Asian American history or 500-page book on it, like the average person probably won't. So is there other resources, and especially if people come together in community to really be able to dive deeper and explore? And so we're looking at creating, going to various different places and creating different resources, whether it be video and just talking about things that have happened in history in this country in regards to the AAPI community and how it influences where we are right now and how we can actually move forward. And so really the desire for that is not only for the Asian American community, for it to educate us and to bring greater awareness, but for the larger community as well. Because one of the things is that, one of my desires is that, my hopes is that people would also have sort of like this awareness and sort of like this light bulb moment of, wow, like this is actually happening. And especially for Asian Americans to really be able to embrace that and move into this. But at the same time, when we sort of like quote unquote wake people up, we're waking them up to pain. And so what does it actually look like for us to actually not just simply say, hey, you know what, sorry, this pain is going to last forever, but to also to like move towards a place of healing and reconciliation and all of that. And so that's really the desire of these resources. And we're in the planning stages right now, but hopefully in the next few months, later on this year, all that, some of that hopefully will be accomplished.
Wow. Yeah, you don't need to apologize for going long. That you're doing a lot of things, and we're really grateful for them. And especially because you were in a church context, and so often we don't hear the full story, or we hear so many negative aspects of how the church is navigating this process, right? And the reality is that's probably the American church is so diverse, and there's so many different aspects of this. And to hear that there are leaders who are meditating on this, talking about this, mourning this, and I was able to attend that prayer that you talked about, and I brought my son with me. He's 7 years old, so he was not going to a playground, and I didn't know how he was processing inside. We always try to expose our kids to reality at the same time, not give them burdens that are not theirs. But I thought that was a great moment for him to be in. And he heard all the prayers and the Psalms and Lamentations, which we don't do enough, I think, and in different languages, Hmong, Korean. It was quite important, I think, for us. And we're about to leave because I had to go, and he said, wait, I want to pray too. I said, okay. And he kind of, really quick, it's like, God, why is there so much pain and hurt? Why are people getting hurt? help us, something like that. And he was done. And like, moved down to like a cartoon topic that he wanted to talk about. But like you opening the church doors and creating those platforms, I think we're introducing seeds of hope and solidarity. So I appreciate that. I think we all need more of that. And if you're a church leader or a local community leader and you're listening, reach out to Andrew, reach out to us. We'll connect you to him. He can kind of guide you through to how to do that. Zora and Ceena, you're doing something a little different or very different with the same heart. It's kind of just starting, but I think it's quite amazing how much you've been able to do in such a short amount of time. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about it, and if there are people out there who are like, okay, I need to do something in my local community, or if they're here in local Detroit and they just want to join what you're doing, what should they know, and how do they want to?
Yeah,
go ahead.
So I definitely want to piggyback off something that Andrew said, because you're talking about like educating ourselves and educational resources, and talked a little bit about it before. Like it's really amazing to me how little we are taught about Asian American history, and not even just Asian American history, but like Eastern like history as well. Because it's incredibly relevant to when you're talking about the Asian community as well. But it's unfortunate that our system doesn't teach us about our Asian American communities, because it makes us ignorant to each other, and it kind of makes us docile when we are talking about the history of the Asian American plight in America. And Asian American struggles and Asian American, successes and all of that. And so it's really hard to have that conversation when you have no idea the history of what's going on. So I think that, that brings us to awareness, which is what me and Ceena are doing. I can't express how many people I've encountered after, starting this movement in Detroit that had no clue that Asian people experienced any type of oppression at all. And it really comes down to like, the model minority myth that while Asian people are successful and they have a culture of applying the pressure and making their kids better and doing this and that, that kind of, erases them in society, that because they're doing better by statistics, that they're not experiencing any type of oppression, or they're not going through hardships. And so I think that going out into the streets and making people aware that this is actually happening is incredible. I've also recently read some comments, unfortunately, social media, but where people actually think that this is a hoax.
Yeah.
Like they really think this is a hoax, like that there's some kind of agenda that's being pushed by Black Lives Matter, as if we're like one organization and not a movement, that Asian people are being oppressed because it somehow benefits us. No one wants to be oppressed. This doesn't benefit anyone. You know what I mean? And the thing about it's like, it's not me speaking. I didn't start this movement for me to speak. I started it so Ceena could speak. You know what I mean? Like I started it so my Asian friends could have a platform to speak about their issues, because when I saw things happening, I asked them if they were okay. And I asked them what happened. I got so many different stories about what was going on, you know? And so it's just that kind of, again, living in a bubble and not being aware that these things are actually happening. So I think awareness is key. Education is key. And as far as action goes, I think that laws are great, but I'm a very direct person. Like I need to see it. I need to see the change in the community. Like, especially in the Black community in particular. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've been in some ignorant conversations about people speaking about the Asian community that have no idea what they're talking about. For example, when I came back from Hong Kong, my friend's mom said, "So how was Hong Kong?" And she was like, "Those Koreans are crazy." And I was like, what where did Koreans come from in the conversation? Because Hong Kong is Chinese. You know what I mean? And I'm like, but also, why are they crazy? Like, why are you saying that? And it's like, where are all these nuances and biases coming from in this conversation? And also, you have an ignorance about geometry because the education system has failed you. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like, I in those kind of moments are critical to speak up.
Absolutely.
Like, and I know that there's moments in the white community, in the Latino community, in the Middle Eastern community where those conversations do happen, and they're usually by people that we're super close to. And it's really imperative for us to speak up when those things happen, because if we don't speak up, it allows people to act violently on their ignorant biases. So
I'm very glad you brought that up. It's something I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to cultivate in my life and my immigrant community. It's like, and sometimes it feels so small. It's like, I'm not going to bring it up. It's bugging me, but it's so small.
right.
Why would I bring it into this relationship and this friendship? And all, we don't really know where that's going to go. It could go to, maybe that person is never going to harm somebody, but they're going to continue that, and that it spreads, and others might.
Right.
And even if it doesn't, like, why would we, even if we love our friends, why would we let a lie live in their heart? Like, we would want to extract it.
Exactly.
So I love that you started this with listening. Like, you asked your friends, so honestly, I want you to say this at the end, but all three of you. But if I had at least one thing for everyone to remember, it's exactly that. Like, listen. And if you're not doing anything, if you're not starting an organization, you can't go to a march, whatever, you're busy. I get it. Like, but do what Zora is doing. Like, if you hear anything that is not true, it's a generalization, it's even a false generalization, like, be courageous, step right then and there. Like, the fruit is going to be a good fruit, whether it's immediate or later. Cena, do you mind talking about WWN and this platform Zora built that she just mentioned? Maybe tell us a little bit about, like, okay, here's what we think has been most productive, and here's what, like, we're still trying to figure out, or we're not going to do anymore because it didn't work. That way, folks who are starting, they can, like, know those pros and cons, or learn lessons that you guys are learning.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna bounce off of what Zora and Andrew were saying. I think that with all of the rallies that we held, we were able to hold a safe and healing space. We got a lot of positive feedback about that. I would like to continue to do that. I just, I don't know if the results would be the same as far as like their turnout or not. But at the end of the day, it doesn't even matter like how many people come out, It's a matter of like being able to give that space to those who want to attend. The last rally that Zora and I co-hosted, it was with Detroit Will Breathe. And in her speech, Zora had said something that really struck me. And she basically said, like, how can we expand like what we're doing? Because when we hold these rallies, like, we're basically preaching to the same choir. We're kind of talking in a bubble, and it's because we're talking to people that care, that are there and showing up because we all believe in the same thing. So I think our main challenge right now, like as a whole, not just WWN, but the entirety of, advocating for justice and equality and ending racism, is like, how do we speak and reach those people who don't care? How do we get their attention? Because we have the attention of those who care, so what is our next step? I think that that's something that I've been thinking about a lot too, ever since Zora had mentioned that. And whether it's having a little historical pamphlet that we hand out that like talks about Asian American history and like handing that out, or holding workshops, or just educating people. It's just like, what is it and how can we do that next? Because it's a lot of work.
I definitely, just to piggyback off of that, I also like in that step, like have been thinking about it as well. And I feel like the best thing that we can do right now is to attack laws that don't benefit us. Like there are all these nuanced laws that directly affect certain races or ethnicities. And I feel like when you can attack those, that makes the most noise, especially in terms of like media and politics, because people want to know like what laws are changing and what's going on. And once you start changing the system, people are going to have to understand why those things are changing, and by default are going to start understanding more so what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like lead the change in the system, and then the changing of people's minds will follow as they're trying to understand the journey of this law changing.
Right.
So I think that's just one good route.
Yep. Yeah. So if there are legal experts out there listening, find those nuances. It's so important to approach it, because we so often we get asked, okay, is the system really broken? Like, do we have racist laws? What's the point? And it's just as simple as often reminding ourselves, and maybe it's because I'm a church kid, but like we talked about in the beginning, like especially those who have faith journey, we of all people should know more than anything, there's something broken inside, and we have to like constantly address it and seek that betterment, because broken people build broken systems, and we can fix the system, but like we'll rebuild it broken again. And so it's so important to do both at once. I think our time is coming to an end. So I was hoping that we could finish by maybe addressing a couple of people that might be listening. Maybe one of you or all of you want to address directly Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, people who don't feel safe, who feel scared or vulnerable. Like, what do you want them to know today? We also talked a little bit about white supremacy and white imperialism. Like, if someone's listening going, wait, like I'm white, like what do I do about this? Am I just guilty? Am I oppressing by just being who I am? Like, what does that really mean? That seems like an academic term that I don't understand. I think I'd love to be able to address those who are listening as well. And even if you want to address other communities, because if we're going to end prejudice, any form of it, especially this one, we cannot put this entire burden on the API community and say, okay, yeah, we'll listen to you, fix it. Like, we have to partner, we have to do it, white, Black, like Latino, like everyone, because it matters, So with that said, I think that would be really great way to end. Maybe we can start with you, Zora. Is there something?
Yeah. So like, I think that talking about white supremacy and imperialism is incredibly important. And I think that, when we're talking about white supremacy, especially for someone who's new into like activism or trying to understand like social things in this country better, it's really important to know that it's not a personal attack on white people. Mm-hmm. Like it's not about white people necessarily. White supremacy is an ideology that says that white people are the standard in America. So when me and Andrew had this similar experience of Andrew wanting to be white adjacent or me wanting to be white, that we didn't feel good enough in our ethnicity or our race, it's because of white supremacy says that we are lower. And it's basically white supremacy, America was built on the foundation of white supremacy. The whole reason for it was to make, slaves and white people separate so that there was productivity in America, so that slaves would be the working class. Mm-hmm. And that's, one of the key foundations of white supremacy is racial separation and racism. So when we're distracted right now fighting each other, like, oh, well, Black people did this more, white people did this more, this and that. And it's like, we're really fighting the same fight, which is white supremacy. It's all the idea that we're under like what should be the glory of America. Mm-hmm. And I think that, it's also important that, like, I really want to say this, because when we talk about white supremacy, it's not just white people. When Black people attack Asian people, they're operating based on white supremacy, which is saying that I can attack this Asian person because they are other in my community, that they are not good enough to be here. That's white supremacy. That ideology is completely based in racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. So I think that we all have to do our part to unlearn and realize that this white supremacy is a system, and it only works if we're all participating. So, and then I also want to talk really quickly about the imperialism. When Donald Trump said the Kung flu and the Chinese virus, he directly led an attack on our own Asian Americans. He sacrificed our Asian Americans, sacrificed their comfort, and led racial tensions against them in this country, letting us see them as a threat because of the virus, because China's becoming a global economic power. And I think that that's sick. And I think that we have to, like, actually really consider when we're doing these things, this idea of racism isn't just social, it's a completely economic system as well. So that's just, had to get that off my chest, but I really want to start that conversation about all of that.
I'm glad and it's really important that we listen to that passion and that understanding, because we can't just be passionate about this and not realize all the roots that maybe are feeding it.
Right.
So I think that's really profound, and something we'd all need to look internally and say, what some of these beliefs might probably holding,
right,
and how do I grow beyond them. Cena, is there something you want to close with, maybe addressing specifically people who might be listening?
I guess before we end, I want to let the AAPI community know that we aren't alone. And if I can help it, I'm always going to do my best to uplift my community. I know that many of us have been living in fear lately. Myself being an Asian woman, I've been going through it, but with each day I feel stronger, and I hope that everyone is going to be okay too. So with that being said, hopefully you guys can also follow Zora and myself on WWN. That's our Instagram handle. We are also on Facebook, and we do check it regularly too. We love being able to be engaged with all of our followers. So please feel free to follow us. Thank you, Cena. Yeah, it's sometimes even the mere follow, even if you're not able to attend or do anything, but maybe we'll help someone remember or know that they're not alone and that people are speaking out and they're doing things. We'll put those links on our comment section so you can, or in the title, so you can kind of see it. Andrew, you want to close this part as well and maybe address people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that in regards to my journey is if you're thinking about jumping in, or if this is something that you're wrestling with and you're wondering, oh, what can I do? I'd encourage you just jump in. I feel like just take that step, whatever that step you feel like, whether it's having the conversation, whether it's learning more and reading a book, whether it's going to a gathering or a march or whatever it may be, and just like taking that first step, whatever that first step is for you. Because I feel like when we jump in, there are other doors that open up, that lead us down different paths. And I feel like it's a beautiful, beautiful journey, not only of self-discovery, of understanding more of who we are and how God has created and wired us, but also the people that you meet along the way. I really feel like are probably one of the best things about the journey, right? Sure. And just even for us having this conversation, like I know you, but like Cena and Zora, like meeting you guys has been like a breath of fresh air. And so, and like the other people that I've met along this journey as well. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest joys of it. And so that's what I would say, like jump in. But also, as you say, like when you were talking about H, when you're saying, hey, if you're like a white person and you're listening to this, and like what can you actually do for the AAPI community? And something that I truly believe is it requires we, right? And in regards to say like this issue, in regards to the AAPI community, the bigotry, the xenophobia, the racism that this community has faced, not just this past year, but in the entire history of Asian Americans in this country, because this isn't just a new issue. This has been happening for decades, centuries, right? Our entire history here, but it requires more than just Asian Americans standing up and saying this is not okay, but it requires everybody to come together and for us to do this, and obviously not just for the AAPI community, but what the Black community has struggled with for so long, for us to all come together and rally together, because this is not just like a one community is going to solve it all, but it really does require like all human beings coming together and saying, this is not okay, right? This is not the way that our culture and our world and our society was meant to be. And so what can we actually do to move towards more of a beautiful place? And so that's like what I would say, jump in. And I think it's a great journey. So thanks, H, appreciate you navigating this.
No worries. Yeah, I'm honored to have all of you out in there, because I think all three of you added some really powerful words in the end here. Please follow these incredible voices. Know that we're here with End Prejudice. Go to endprejudice.org, follow us so you know what we're doing. We're going to continue dialogues like this, and there may be other things that we're doing that may draw you into. We're really not going to do this alone, so we're going to continue to fight it together. Thanks again, Cena. Thank you, Zora. Thank you for WWN and everything they're doing. And thank you, Andrew, for your voice and what Kensington's doors are open for as well. So for everyone here, I want to thank you for spending time with us and hope that you have grown today just as much as I have. Up next time. Bye.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Yes.